October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and Sisterhood Sharing Sessions is very happy to speak with a survivor, Andrea Watkins. I'm looking forward to you giving insight into what your experience was once you had that diagnosis. So first of all, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I want to start with, first of all, Andrea, how did you come to find out about the breast cancer diagnosis?
I remember it was a self-diagnosis. I remember just feeling kind of like a lump on my breast, and then I felt it and it was, abnormal. So then that's when I went into the doctor and they gave me a biopsy, and it came back positive that I had breast cancer.
That had to be hard to hear. Did you do that as a regular practice where you routinely examined yourself?
No, never. I just happened to stumble upon it. I never really, no, not at all. And so I've been aware of checking myself, since then, but no, not before that at all.
Now, do you recall whether or not you had any history of breast cancer in the family that would have made you aware and prompted you to maybe even think about doing an exam or think about the importance of it?
No, I haven't heard anything like that in my family. There's other things, but not that.
So it was just a random thing you thought about in that moment. Hey, let me go ahead and check for,
No, it felt abnormal, and then I just felt it and I was like, what is that? That type of thing.
Was there a pain associated with it?
I don't quite remember if it was a pain or something, but something made me feel it, so I don't know if it was a slight pain or maybe my hand rubbed down my shirt for a minute and it was like, oh, what is that? That type of thing. It wasn't like I was checking for it. I think women should check for it. I was so young I was in my 30s. I just kept hearing over and over, you're so young to have it, So I wasn't checking for it. I wasn't even going in every year to have a mammogram. I wasn't even at that point going in every year to have that done.
So then after you felt the lump, you went to the doctor, you went to get an exam right away because something didn't feel right.
Right.
Now, do you recall what type of screening you had? Was it a standard mammography?
Mammogram, but then they saw it. So they gave me a biopsy, which was kind of like a needle that they put into the lump, and took out a piece of tissue from that and diagnosed it, and then called me back and said that it was indeed cancer.
Do you remember how long it took for them to determine or have the results?
I think because they were giving me the biopsy, I think it was just like a day or two.
Tell me about whether or not you recall how you felt immediately after hearing about the breast cancer diagnosis.
I don't know. Through all that process, hearing about it, going through, being treated for it, all of that. All I remember is telling my husband at the time and him breaking down. That's what I remember most about that.
And then what about your children? Because you had young children at that time as well.
Yeah, and we kind of kept it from them until I started going to the Mayo for treatment. Then they came with me, and my mom too. And then it started to be like a family trip up to Rochester.
Family affair. Mayo Clinic is known as one of the best in the world. So you were really lucky to be near that clinic.
Yeah, absolutely. My mom, as soon as she found out, she said, oh, I've got to get you into the Mayo, and then she just really took over from there. And she got a hold of a doctor there that was supposed to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to him, and then it all just fell into place from there.
Now, speaking of doctors, do you remember the conversation between you and your doctor regarding your diagnosis? And did you feel comfortable that you were receiving all the information needed to assess the next steps? And most importantly, the best form of treatment for you?
Yeah, when I went to the doctor, I felt really comfortable with him. He was supposed to be a really great doctor. He said that he would get me in right away, and he wanted to make sure that it didn't reach my lymph nodes under my arm. So they did a biopsy on that as well, and it hadn't reached my lymph nodes. So then he said, we'll schedule surgery.
I think that's so important when you have a doctor that you trust and that you feel like the information that's being shared with you is something that you understand, and that you feel like together you've come together to identify the best treatment for you. Speaking of treatment, what treatments were discussed and which one did you finally land on?
Okay, so it was either I could have a lumpectomy, which I did, and that was just to remove the lump. And then my breasts weren't that different in size, so that was fine. But I heard you could also have a mastectomy, but that wasn't really necessary. So
And was it because you caught it in time? Because as soon as you recognized that you had an abnormal lump there, you sought treatment. Because of that, you had the option to having the cancer removed as opposed to having your entire breast removed. It hadn't spread to your lymph nodes, as your doctor stated before.
Right.
Well, that has to be good to know, because I know they always talk about the earlier you find it, the better off your treatments and the overall outcome. So for you to have just in that moment, without even really thinking about it or being a standard routine, to be able to examine that and understand the seriousness of it and understand the importance of seeking help with the doctor right away.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important.
I just remember feeling relieved, like, okay, I can handle this. Women go through this all the time, like this diagnosis, and then it wasn't as severe as a mastectomy, and I could just get the lump out. And I've been back for many tests and I'm still fine.
That's wonderful. Now, do you remember how long after the diagnosis and after you confirmed and determined together with your doctor the treatment that you would use? How long was the process, or how long was it before you then started that treatment?
Like after the lumpectomy, I know I had to start chemotherapy. I think it was like 3 weeks after that or something like that. Okay. And then my chemotherapy appointments were 3 weeks apart. And I think I had to have like 3 to 6 of those. When I remember having the chemo appointments, and I would have to come into the hospital, and they injected me, and then I remember them just giving me this orange popsicle that I would have to suck on, and then for a long time after, it was like, oh, I couldn't stand orange popsicles. And then I lost my hair, and my husband helped me cut off the last bit of my hair because strands were just falling out. And after a while, I just thought I might as well just shave my whole head. So he helped me with that. And I just remember feeling nauseous in my head, like the medicine, how people say they feel nauseous, in their stomach or whatever. But this actually made me feel nauseous in my head in the medicine. And it was a rough time. Like the first couple of days after the chemotherapy was really rough. You threw up a lot and that sort of thing.
How often did you have to go to chemotherapy or have chemotherapy?
It was like every 3 weeks I had to do it. I remember that.
And do you remember about how long the treatments were? Were you there an hour at a time, 2 hours at a time, every 3 weeks?
Yeah, it seemed like I was there for like 2 hours at a time. Yeah.
Now, anytime you went to these treatments, was it imperative that you had someone there with you to take you home? Because it sounds like immediately after, is that where you felt nauseous and weak immediately after? So you had to have someone there with you as support?
Yeah, my husband would drive me there and take me home. And I remember having to leave it like, like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and dreading it. And yeah, he would definitely have to take me home because I'd feel not good after, especially that night coming home.
How long did you feel that way? Do you remember? Was it a couple of days after that treatment that you felt that way? You felt tired and nauseous?
I think it was just like that night and maybe the next day. And then after that, I was okay.
You
You
talked
know?
about, Andrea, losing your hair, which of course is something that happens with chemotherapy. And I'm sure it's something that your doctor discussed with you may happen as well. When you started losing your hair, well, really just how did the overall process towards healing affect you physically, mentally, and spiritually? So losing the hair, that's both a physical aspect of it. I'm sure there had to be some mental component to it. Do you remember how all of that made you feel at that time?
Spiritually, I was very grounded. I knew that God had me. I knew He was going to heal me. I was rooted, grounded in Christ and in the church. Physically, I did feel tired, just really tired. And of course, I had my kids, I had 3 kids, trying to get through that, raising them and feeling exhausted half the time. Mentally, for whatever reason, well, I know the reason, God. Mentally, all I kept thinking was like, how can I help others? During that time, it was a lot of empathy grew. In that process, I had empathy towards people that would go through that or just hardships in life in general. And I couldn't wait to go and help somebody else. I never really owned it. I never took it as my own. I never said I have cancer or my cancer or anything like that. I never owned it. It was just something that I happened to be going through for whatever reason. But I knew I was going to be okay. And that's what brought me through.
So, speaking of which, what do you feel gave you your greatest source of strength towards healing? Was it the combination? I know you talked about your family was there, your friends were there, you had your church family, and of course, you're deeply rooted in your faith. In addition to all of that, did you have any type of mantra or meditation or any other mechanisms that you used to help you cope with it?
Well, I feel like when you say mantra or something like that, I feel like my source was my faith in God. That is the ultimate for me. And my family was there to support me. And like you said, my spiritual family was there. I remember they were having a church function when I had to take this medication, and my husband took the kids to this function, and I really wanted to go. But I remember my people always calling to make sure, are you okay, and praying for me. And then I remember one night my women's church group, they were going out to Bukas, and they all called me from Bukas and just passed the phone around. I'll never forget that. Those times like that where, pass the phone around to make, here, talk to Andrea. It was such a wonderful feeling to know that you were surrounded by God, my family, my church family. It really is wonderful to have a support system like that.
Buka, that's a restaurant. So while you were having dinner, because
They were
Buka,
having dinner.
yeah, while they were having dinner,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they passed the phone around. Do you remember any of what someone may have said?
Not really, not as much as I remember them. How are you doing, Andrea? And I just thought that was the most, I don't know, that has often stuck out in my mind. I'm still friends with the lady that ran that group, and that always just stuck out in my mind that they took the time while they're eating to call me to make sure I was okay.
Yeah, so like that sisterhood, that community of women that just
Yeah,
kind of surrounded you with that love and,
yeah, yeah,
it makes all the difference. It does really make a difference. And the fact that, like you said, that's something that really stands out and it just encouraged you and inspired you and it just lifted you up. It sounds like it really lifted you up.
yeah, most definitely.
When you received the confirmation that the cancer was in remission, do you remember how you felt about that news in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, yes, I'm cancer free, but I think more so the years that have passed and they keep saying I'm in remission. That's the wonderful thing each year, because now, of course, it's been 20 years, and that's a wonderful thing. And they never find anything within since that happened 20 years ago.
That has to be a
Yeah.
wonderful feeling. Talk to me about what, if anything, changed in your life after the diagnosis and the subsequent remission that now you said has been over 20 years now.
There's something that happens to you, I think, just when you think that you may lose your life, or the ones around you are concerned. You just get a new perspective on life. What's the real meaning of life? And how can I make every day on earth count? Of course, we all get busy with our lives and family and this and that, but it just, you kind of look at things differently, and maybe this little things that you think are important are not so important, and just how you view life. Spend more quality time with your kids, or because it could go, your life could end before you want it to. But it just helps you to have a different perspective on life and the importance of it and the important people in it.
What life lessons do you want to share with women who may find themselves on the receiving end of a breast cancer diagnosis?
I think for everyone, it's so different. What really brought me through is my faith. If I didn't have that, I don't know how people do it, or have, like, I have to have faith in something, right? Like, I can't just being diagnosed and then I just don't know any other way. I just don't know any other way. I guess I would say to have your relationship with God, and maybe that's what brought me closer to God. Oh my goodness. I don't know any other way. So the only thing I can say is call on God and develop that relationship with him. If you just rely on yourself and your family, I mean, they're ultimately, they're there for you, but they can't save you.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos.